Today is the new deadline for Boris Johnson to hand over those WhatsApp messages, diaries and notebooks to Baroness Hallett's COVID inquiry. They've been given another 48 hours. 4 p.m. is the deadline. Boris Johnson says the Cabinet Office now have the messages, the diaries and the notebooks in their unredacted glory. On the Times has a story saying Johnson's challenging Sunak to hand those WhatsApp messages to the inquiry. The Cabinet Office needs to produce those messages by 4 p.m, exchanged between Johnson and, we think, 40 ministers and advisers over a period of more than 2 years. This could all head to the courts if they refuse to comply. Also, who owns the intellectual property on this communication? I asked barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn about this, and he told me under the Inquiries Act, Baroness Hallett has the right to ask for whatever she wants. There could be a fine or even a jail term if they refuse.
I always say, in terms of inquiries, sunlight is the best disinfectant. What you want to do is to control the narrative. And what that means is to tell the world that you are being terribly cooperative and you're happy to hand over absolutely everything because you've got nothing to hide. And I think that's what Boris is doing. He's telling the world, look, hang about, I'll let you have the full unedited messages and notebooks, and I've given them to the Cabinet Office, and I would encourage them to disclose them. Now, obviously, Baroness Hallett has given a deadline of 4 p.m. today, Thursday, the 1st of June, to hand over these relevant bits and pieces. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that unravels. Now, the other interesting thing is obviously from a copyright point of view. As a general point of view for anybody writing anything, you as the author would own the copyright in those words. And you might recall that Meghan Markle successfully sued the Mail on Sunday regarding the publication of a letter she wrote to her father. Now, a lot of people talked about privacy and so on and so forth, but one of the main reasons that she was successful was because she owned the copyright in that letter. And that's a very important thing. A bit too much of the letter was basically used by the Mail on Sunday, and as a result, they infringed that particular copyright.
So who owns the copyright on these messages? Is it the government department or is it Boris himself?
Well, this is the interesting thing, because it depends what happens. There is an exception to the rule about the author being the copyright owner, and that exception is if something is done in the course of your employment. And if it's in the course of your employment, then your employer is the copyright owner. So that's the position there. And that's the problem with, I always say that whatever you write, whatever you say, it will always end up in the hands of the people you least want it to. So work on that sort of basis. And we've been here before. We had Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages. We've had, you might remember the case of Wagatha Christie. They talk about WhatsApp messages and the phone, which ended up in Davy's locker at the bottom of the sea. And that glorious moment when Rebecca Varley said, I don't know Davy, and I have no idea who his locker is. So you work on that sort of basis. But basically, if it's in the course of your employment, then the owner of the copyright is your employer.
Barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn there on that new 4 p.m. deadline for Boris, for the Cabinet Office to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApps to the COVID inquiry.